Well, today, Portland City Council had its first chance to weigh in as a group on Mayor Keith Wilson's budget proposal, which had to make up more than a $90 million shortfall. The mayor plans to do that by cutting around 200 city jobs and raise rates on water bills, sewer and stormwater bills, and parking fees. He also wants to scale back non-critical maintenance at parks and community centers in order to keep those open. Now, this afternoon, city councilors talked about the budget as a whole and amendments that they plan to bring up before the final vote in June. Councilor Eric Zimmerman says he thinks the mayor's cuts and layoffs are not deep enough on the administrative level, since the city has had nearly a year now to transition to the new form of government.
So this seems not aggressive enough to me. And I am not seeing a budget that reflects an organizational chart that both admits duplicative positions or services and reductions to an enterprise model, which you talk a lot about. So help me out. Why should I not make a more aggressive amendment or budget note? Because this is a very long glide path that you've laid out for these structural differences, and I don't understand it.
Right. So one of the key framing we had to pursue was, how do we maintain the culture, focus on high standards, and maintain or ensure workplace safety?
Now, Councilor Steve Novick says he's concerned that the city is relying too much on one-time funding, and that will be in the same budget hole next year, only worse.
Your budget relies significantly on one-time funding that we can't count on next year. I guess it's possible that Metro might give us $15 million 2 years in a row, but I was curious specifically how much state one-time funding we're relying on, because that I think we can guarantee we won't get next year because the legislature only meets every 2 years.
You know, I don't know the exact amount, perhaps.
So the total external funding, there's a couple of different places where external funding comes in, but I think if you're referring specifically to the shelters primarily, the total external funding for those programs combined is $58.8 million.
Overall, Mayor Wilson's plan to end unsheltered homelessness by opening more overnight shelters and day centers has not been met with much pushback. He plans to use $24 million of those external dollars to open 1,500 new shelter beds. That money is coming from Metro and the state. However, some local groups are raising concerns and are criticizing this plan and the long-term impact it could have for those living on Portland streets. So, joining us now live is Molly Hogan. She's the executive director of the Welcome Home Coalition, representing many organizations that support people on the streets. So, Molly, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Blair. I'm happy to be here.
So first, let's jump in. Mayor Wilson has been pushing for more overnight shelter, and his homeless strategy is arguably, let's just say, a main reason he won the election. So broadly speaking, what are your concerns with this shelter-first model that he's chasing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So first off, I want to express that Welcome Home Coalition really appreciates the mayor's enthusiasm and his focus and energy around addressing homelessness, because we want to see that too. That said, a shelter bed is not a home, and so it's not a long-term solution. So we believe that shelter is an important part of a holistic homeless response system. We believe that shelter should exist. We just want to know what is the follow-through plan in this plan. If we increase the shelter beds, when last year 1 in 5 people exited emergency shelter into permanent housing, so 80% of the time people were not moving out of emergency shelter into long-term housing. And so we want to make sure that there's funding that gives that rent assistance and those programming, the consistent case management that moves people out of shelter into permanent housing. Otherwise, we'll just continue to see people living in shelter and not transitioning out of homelessness.
I'm curious your thoughts. So there are a lot of people who don't really agree with a housing first model. And I've seen people during my reporting who are not prepared for that type of housing, going straight from the streets into housing. They end up being evicted, et cetera. So how do you address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We hear that a lot. And so what I like to remind folks is that housing first doesn't mean housing only. there are actually 5 core principles of Housing First, and one of them includes support services, that support that some folks need to learn how to become housed again and to be a good tenant and a good neighbor. And unfortunately, a lot of the programming isn't funded to the degree to supply that supportive service for folks. And so they end up not being able to stabilize in their housing.
So just to play devil's advocate here, it seems like you're looking at a more long-term solution when the mayor has said there needs to be an immediate fix in order to save lives. We know more than 450 people died on Portland streets last year. But talking of just that immediate goal, do you feel that overnight shelters accomplish that, or perhaps do they prolong the crisis, even make it worse?
Right, they can, right? We think that short-term safety, of course, is really, really important. But if people are moving out of our existing shelters, it opens up space for more folks. And so we just want to make sure we're making a system, a holistic system that's efficient, and not just growing a system that is not actually ending people's homelessness.
Now, we're also hearing tonight from the spokesperson for the Portland Solutions team. They're focused on responding to homelessness in the Rose City. And I want to read to you what they have to say about some of your criticism of the mayor's plan. He says, your statement presumes that all those experiencing homelessness in Portland have the same level of acuity. In reality, the participants the city works to shelter tend to be those with a high level of acuity. These are participants that need dedicated wraparound services. While we agree that the totality of care should not just be shelter only, Welcome Home's criticism is misplaced. What do you make of that?
I just think we're on the same page ultimately. And so I don't think we're misplaced. We're just doing our job, right? We are analyzing. If you look at what's worked well in other cities around the nation, the only cities in the nation that have actually reduced their homeless populations, they all had one thing in common. They all aggressively invested in long-term housing solutions, rent assistance, moving people into housing and giving them wraparound support. And so we just want to see that happen here as well, because the city has focused on shelter and increasing it, doubling it in the last 2 years, and the data is showing that it's not successfully moving people into permanent housing situations.
Okay, Molly Hogan, Executive Director of the Welcome Home Coalition. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Blair. Have a good night.